It's one of the joys of being part of a community that we get to share in these moments together, isn't it? You know, and we don't want to ever take these moments for granted, that we get to be the part of somebody's life and faith journey. It's a really exciting moment. So I am going to do my very, very best to speak in a way that is understood, but in a short space of time. So I just feel like I need to say to you, we need to have our seatbelts buckled up. We are going. I am continuing a series that we have been in as a church, as a community over the last, I don't know how many weeks, 5, 6 weeks, that's entitled Life Path. If by any chance, anything that any of us have said today, you go, oh, do you know what? I'd like to know a little bit more. You can find all of those talks on our YouTube channel, Elim Life Church. Yeah, we are that cool. And you can catch up with all those if you think, oh, actually, I'm not quite sure what she said today, but I'd quite like to find out maybe some of those other ideas. And so you can find those on our YouTube channel. So to help us understand what we're going to be thinking about for the next sort of 10 or 15 minutes or so, from the book of Exodus, and we're going to be going to chapter 34, so I'm giving you the heads up straight away. I've been thinking about how we present ourselves. You know, today we've presented 2 babies to God. We've dedicated 2 babies to God. And I mean, they are dressed in their finery today. Very, very nice. And I've been thinking about this idea of how we present ourselves. Now, you don't have to wave at me, but if you have any kind of online social profile, you might be on Facebook. I'm not looking at any generations or making any judgments about who's where. You might be on X, which was formerly known as Twitter. You might be on Threads, Insta, TikTok, LinkedIn. You might have a gaming profile. You will begin to understand this idea of how we present ourselves, right? That our Facebook profiles or our Twitter, X profiles, or on Threads or Instagram, we are presenting a version of ourselves. Often, let's be honest, the best version of ourselves, right? I've seen some of your Facebook profiles. I know they are decades old. I also know that some of you have highly used the filters, myself included. We present a version of ourselves online, don't we? We're like, this is kind of who we are. But the people who get to see us in the real life moments and in the ups and the downs, they really get to know who we really are. Even, can I just do a bit of a, is anyone on Be Real? Anyone still use that? I don't know. But even if you are, you're not being real, are you? You're not presenting every moment of every day. And I'm not saying that we're deliberately lying, but we want to present ourselves in the best possible light. But we really share the core identity of who we are. And in these few verses in Exodus 34, God himself is introducing himself. God himself is defining and describing who he is. If he had an online profile, if he was on social media, this is what he would say in his little bio. This is how he chooses to describe himself to humanity then and to us still today. And the expression of how God describes himself is fully seen in the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And so we see God presenting himself. And as I've been thinking about this idea of how we present ourselves and what that looks like and what that could mean, I've thought of 2 things really. One is that sometimes we might think of God, if we think of God at all, and think it can't possibly be true. Like that description of God feels like too good to be true, and we're going to think about that this morning. Or we might think to ourselves, I couldn't possibly be myself before God. I couldn't possibly let him see behind the shine and the glimmer and the filter of a profile. Because if God really knew what I was like, he wouldn't want anything to do with me. So I want us to understand today that as God describes himself and defines himself, it's so that we can know him. It's so that we can be confident that we are able to approach him. And not only to approach him and to know him, but then also to become like him. This is why he introduces himself in this way. So who is God? What is he like? Well, Jesus is God, and this is what he's like. Let me read you these few verses. It's in a conversation between God and a guy who's leading called Moses. And it says this: Then the Lord came down in a cloud and stood there with him. He's on the top of a mountain. And he called out his own name, Yahweh. The Lord passed in front of Moses, calling out, Yahweh, the Lord. the God of compassion and mercy. I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. I lavish unfailing love to 1,000 generations. I forgive iniquity, rebellion, and sin. But I do not excuse the guilty. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children and grandchildren. The entire family is affected, even children in the 3rd and 4th generations. Now, don't get freaked out by that second part of the description, because that's God saying, look, my love is limitless, 1,000 generations. It's vast. It's unfailing. You'll never plumb the depths of my love for you. But consequence of the things that we say, do, and think wrong, there's a limitation to them. And there's consequence to that, but I'm going to limit that. And in those days, and maybe even some of you understand that here today, 3 or 4 generations would live together in a household. I'm not saying you should all do that, but they lived, the grandparents and the great-grandparents and the kids and all of that. And so it was this idea that it would affect a household. If somebody was doing something wrong or experiencing something, it would be limited in that way. In contrast to, God's not threatening us, but in contrast to this extravagant love and this forgiving approach. So what does it mean? What is going on here? Let me just give us a little bit of context. God has rescued people from slavery. They have known generation after generation after generation, no freedom, no choices, no agency. They've had to kind of be under the thumb of slave masters. And then God sets them free. And as they are figuring out what this freedom looks like, as they are figuring out what does it mean to be human, what does it mean to know God and to follow God in freedom, God begins to give them a way of being, a life path, if you will, of what it looks like to know him individually and in community. Give me a little wave. You might have heard of the 10 Commandments. It's kind of that idea. God's given them these ideas, these ways of being to help them form together as a community. That it is possible to know God and to become like him. That it's possible to know God and to grow in his likeness. And the same is true for us today. Jesus is the one we find our life in, not just a way of being, but our actual life is found in him. Jesus is the one who demonstrates all of these characteristics we've just been reading together: kindness and mercy and compassion and faithfulness. We can spend a whole lifetime exploring who Jesus is, and we will never get to the end of who he is. We can spend a whole lifetime thinking about and discovering and experiencing and reading and studying and understanding and talking to people about who God is, and we will never come to the end of who he is. But for today, let us think about this idea that Jesus, God himself, is forgiving and kind. And because he's forgiving and kind, we don't need to be afraid. We live in a world where there's so much fear about so many things all the time. Because God doesn't just forgive, he is forgiving. He won't reject us, and he won't leave us on our own to sort out life. I'm so grateful for that. Anyone else not very practical. I'm grateful for the people who are practical in my life. I couldn't do some of those things. And God's like, there are things that you can't do for yourself that I am going to do for you. I am going to offer you forgiveness. I'm going to show you my kindness. And I'm sure, and I'm not going to ask you to tell me the stories, but I'm sure that at one point in your life, you have experienced someone being unkind to you, or perhaps unforgiving to you, whether that's from a colleague or a friend or a spouse or a sibling or even a random stranger. You've experienced what it is to not have kindness and not receive forgiveness. And if we're honest, there are times where we're not kind and forgiving too. Don't tell anyone. Don't look at anyone. No, not me. Surely not. But God wants us to be in no confusion about who he is, because he wants us to be willing to approach him. He wants us to be willing to know him. He wants us to understand that we can find life in him, and then to share the goodness of God with those around us. And so what we think about God will determine and shape how we approach God, and what we think about God will determine and shape who we become. And so I want us to think about those two elements. It will shape how we approach God, and it will shape who we become. If we don't believe that God is forgiving, we won't be forgiving. If we don't believe that God is willing and able and has paid the price for us to be forgiven, we won't be able to find it in ourselves to be forgiving to others. I remember when I was working in a supermarket many years ago, I had a really, really wonderful boss. Does anyone else? Give me a wave if you've got a really good boss or supervisor in your work. Oh, I'm really sad. There's only about 5 of us. I'm so sorry. If you're sat with a colleague, don't look at them. Because the reality is that, like, what we think about God will determine how we approach him. And in my working environment, when I was through uni, I was working in the supermarket, and I had a really, really lovely supervisor. And at the end of the day, particularly on a Saturday, she would have me help her cash up the tills. I don't know if anyone's ever had to do that before. And so for anyone who knows me, you're looking at me going, Sarah, your maths is rubbish. I was trustworthy. My maths was bad, but I was trustworthy. So I would come at the end of the day, and it was a Saturday, and I remember this one occasion. We're cashing up, we're putting the money into bags, you have to seal the bags, and you make a note and you do all that. And as we got to the end of it, when we started to tally it up, we realized there were hundreds of pounds missing. So we kind of went through it all again, and we tallied it all up again, and there was still some money missing. Now at this point, my boss is thinking, has someone stolen something? Have we dropped something when we brought it up? Have we done something wrong? She will be in so much trouble, obviously, if there's hundreds of pounds missing. And as we were tracing back our steps, I suddenly realized, oh, I've messed up the piles of money. I've miscounted. And I had this moment, and I don't know if you've ever had this moment where you know you've done something wrong. You know, like when heat comes from the bottom of your toes, when you get like that knot in your stomach, when you're like looking around desperately, like, let the earth swallow me up. And I knew in that moment that the reason that we were hundreds of pounds down and 30 minutes over our shift is because I had done something wrong. Not illegal for the benefits of those watching on the internet, but I'd done something wrong. And in that moment, I had a choice. Was I going to fess up, or was I just going to somehow let it be found out later on down the line? Well, because I trusted my manager, because I knew actually she was a very kind person, and I was fairly confident that she wouldn't scream and shout at me, I fessed up straight away. And I was like, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem, it's me. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I explained what I'd done. And to be honest, she was just relieved. We sorted the problem. And, you know, she never held that against me. The next week, she had me in helping her count the money again. She was either very brave or, you know, I don't know. But she didn't hold it against me. I'd made a mistake. I'd said to her, I'm really sorry, I've made a mistake. We were able to fix the problem and move forward. And for me, it's a flawed picture because we're all human, but for me, that's such a picture of what it looks like when we know that God is not just someone who forgives, but is forgiving. That when we do mess up, when we do get things wrong, we don't have to present our best selves to God. Hello, here's my Facebook profile. Here's my best reel on Instagram. Yeah, I know what they are, kids. Here's whatever. Like, we don't have to, but we can come honestly with our flaws, with our failures, because the reality is it's when we mess up, not if we mess up, with our mistakes, confident that the God who is slow to anger and the God who is forgiving will respond well to me, will respond with grace and kindness and forgiveness. That he won't be like, oh, not you again, or oh, not that problem again. But we have to understand and know that that's who he is in order for us to be willing to come to him in the first place. And God, in these words, he uses 3 words. He says, I forgive iniquity, rebellion, and sin. Anyone else think they're weird words? They're weird words, right? I'm not sure how often you're going around using those words. Hello, over the cash point. I would like, you know, I don't know. But they're words that we go like, what is God forgiving? And why do we even need forgiveness? Well, I'm going to let you all do your own Google researches of the original language. It's very exciting. But essentially, iniquity, rebellion, and sin. So iniquity is this idea of anything you can do wrong, from running a red light to murder. I know some of you are like, oh yeah, I've run a red light. Don't look at me. I'm not. This idea of rebellion is like a legal word. So this idea of like breaking a rule or breaking a law. It's also this idea of like, I know what God wants of me, but I'm going to kind of do my own thing anyway. So it's this idea. And then this word sin means to miss the mark. Anyone ever tried to throw a dart at a darts board? Please, you should, it's bad. I don't even get it on the board, let alone anywhere near the bullseye. And it's this idea of like missing the mark. And these are not to make us feel condemned or ashamed, but to go, wow, God, you are forgiving of it all. There's nothing I can do or say or think that you aren't able or willing to forgive. God is forgiving of the whole of the thing that we could ever do or say or think that is wrong. And we're all in this same boat. We all need this kind of forgiveness. And he says, I'm willing to forgive it all. And not only am I willing, I'm the only one who's able. And maybe as you're hearing this, you're thinking, well, I don't even need forgiveness. I don't know what she's talking about. Or you might be thinking, I don't deserve forgiveness. What is she talking about? And maybe we find ourselves between those two spectrums. I don't need anything from God. I don't need forgiveness. Or maybe I don't deserve forgiveness. If God really knew, if he looked behind my Facebook profile or my Twitter profile or my Insta or my Threads or my TikTok and really saw what was going on, he wouldn't be forgiving to me. He wouldn't be loving towards me. And yet God says he is. You see, even in the context of this story, the people have already messed up. God and Moses have had this conversation once already. God has given the instructions and the information to Moses for the people already. And before he's even back to tell them what's going on, they have absolutely messed up. They've broken the partnership agreement that's based on God's character and not ours. They've broken the way of following him. They've taken things into their own hands. And so God says, okay, Moses, back up the mountain. We'll do this all over again. And in this description, he makes sure we understand, because he's immediately doing it, I am forgiving. He's already living out the words that he's describing himself. He's already showing that he's forgiving because he's giving them a second chance. And what we understand as we read through the Bible, as we understand church history, is God is forever wanting to give us those chances to come back to him, to know his friendship and to know his forgiveness. And why? He doesn't turn his back on them then, and he won't turn his back on us now. Because the reality is that we all need this kind of help and forgiveness. The original humans messed up. They brought separation to this relationship, this friendship, and God's plan to rescue us and reunite us is found in Jesus. God knows that this way of living, this iniquity, this rebellion, this sin is damaging to us and damaging to others and the world around us. And we can't make it right on our own. That's why Jesus came. And I wish I had time today to describe to you the life of Jesus, how forgiving and kind he was and is to all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds. But you might have to do that bit of research on your own, or join us on Thursdays for Autumn Nights. You are most welcome. But Jesus becomes this bridge, this way of knowing the forgiveness of God and being reunited to a friendship with God that he originally intended. Even as Jesus is dying on the cross, even though Jesus has done nothing wrong, and essentially the idea that we get in Exodus is that he's carrying the weight of all of our iniquity, rebellion, and sin on him, even though he's done nothing wrong. Even on the cross, he's saying, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. Even in that moment of pain and of difficulty and of challenge, even when he doesn't know how to kind of feel in that moment, he's saying, hey, come on, forgive them. Even in that moment of crisis and challenge. And the great thing is, Jesus is still saying the same to us today. I'll forgive you. You can know what it is to have the weight of all of that taken off your shoulders, because I've already counted the cost. I've already taken the blame. I've already paid the price for that. So I want us to think about what shapes us in these two ways. Shapes how we approach him, and it shapes what we become. What we think about God shapes how we approach him. And the life path that we are invited onto is one where he is forgiving of our flaws and our failures as we come to him. We don't have to give the best version of ourselves. We can come as we are. We don't have to pretend before God. We can come as we are. We don't have to somehow think that if I do all these really, really good things, somehow God will love me. He loves you anyway. And then there's nothing you can do to earn that love or that forgiveness. He offers it as a free gift. So maybe you're in that situation today and you're thinking, maybe I need to think again about who God is, about who Jesus is, so that I know that I'm welcome to come to him. I'm welcomed to know him. He's forgiving and kind, So I don't need to be afraid, and I don't need to think that I have to fix it all on my own. What we think about God shapes us, and it shapes who we become. As we become like him, this life path he invites us onto is one where we can know him and be like him. So I want you to imagine, for me, how you were this morning. You woke up and you were getting ready to come out to a meeting at church. Maybe for some of you, this is an unusual environment or it's something you do regularly. But you're putting on your face, you're brushing your teeth. I really hope you've brushed your teeth. Please tell me if you're sat next to someone, you've brushed your teeth. If in this moment you are realizing that you haven't brushed your teeth, don't hug anyone at the end of the meeting, please. But you're thinking, I'm going to be around other people. I'm not just going to stay in my PJs, where no one's going to see me. I'm going to make an effort. I might wash my hair, or I might put on something. Some of you are looking at me going, yeah, I got my nice togs on today, Sarah. And there's this idea, isn't it, that we want to look good, we want to feel good, we want to present ourselves well. But before God, we don't have to do that. And we can trust that how God presents himself is true, is real, is honest. He is who he says he is. He is as good and forgiving and loving and kind and compassionate and gracious as he says he is. And it sounds like it's too good to be true, but it is good and it is true. And it's fully found in Jesus. And he offers us an invitation and a choice. What will we do with what we know about Jesus? How will that shape how we approach God, and how will that shape who we become? So this week, as you are getting ready, whether it's for a dedication party, a birthday party, as you're thinking about Christmas, as you are getting ready, maybe take those moments to reflect and think about, who is Jesus? Is he as good as he says he is? That presentation, his profile, his bio, his CV, is he who he says he is? Can I trust my life to him? And can I bring the fullness of who I am to him, knowing that it's not about becoming a good or better version of me, but a whole new person in Jesus, where I get to be like him to those around me. Let's pray. So we're just going to take a moment to reflect. Karen and the team are going to lead us in a song of reflection, which really is an invitation to bring it all to Jesus. It's an invitation to say, hey, I might not have it all together, and that's okay. Or I might not even be sure that I need your forgiveness, Jesus, but I might be willing to explore a little bit more about who you are anyway. Or it might be that sense of, God, how am I reflecting you to those around me? Am I forgiving? Not about staying in situations that are dangerous or harmful, but am I willing to reflect your forgiveness because I've received it myself? And so they're going to sing this song that will just give us a few moments to maybe think about this, reflect on it, talk to Jesus ourselves. And if you'd like to do something practically responsive, then in the room near the foyer, there are these little pieces of paper that are simply just blank, almost blank pieces of paper that are about this profile of Jesus, to start writing down some of the things you think about who he is and what that looks like in your life. If you'd like to do that, you can find those there, and there's creative stuff in the room. If not, you can download it digitally and be continuing to think through that this week. Jesus, who are you? Are you forgiven? Are you forgiving of me? Can you forgive me? Do I need your forgiveness? Would you help me to understand that? So yeah, let's sing this song together and take a few moments to reflect. Thank you.